Locusta of Gaul, a true case file. One of the earliest documented cases of serial murder involved a woman known as Locusta of Gaul, who lived in Rome during the reign of emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. By most accounts, she was an expert at creating poisons, and her talents were sought by Agrippina and the younger, who wished to remove her husband, the Emperor Claudius, to ensure her son Nero would assume control of the empire. Locusta was then employed by Nero himself to remove any potential threats to his power. Nothing is known of Locusta's early life, but it is assumed she originated in Gaul and came to Rome during the reign of the Emperor Claudius. There she began to use her knowledge of herbal extracts as a means to murder people, and soon became a prolific poison. However, by 54 AD, she had been caught by the Roman authorities and imprisoned on charges of murder. She was then approached by Empress Agrippina the Younger, who was the younger sister to the previous emperor Caligula. Agrippina ordered Locusta to procure a suitable poison to murder her husband. Claudius had assumed imperial powers after the assassination of his nephew Caligula, who was murdered by the Praetorian Guard in 37 AD, after only 3 years as emperor. Despite being considered an idiot by most of his family, Claudius had managed to hold on to the reins of power, and in his early rule he attempted to placate the Senate and was easily influenced by powerful senators. By his later years, he began to grow more formidable in exercising imperial administration, gaining many hostile opponents within the Senate, which resulted in numerous attempts on his life. Several coups and assassination attempts were made during his reign, and those responsible were exiled or executed. His niece and fourth wife Agrippina had by now come to regard Claudius's son Britannicus as a threat to her ambitions for her own son Nero's political future. Britannicus was Claudius's child from his previous marriage to Valeria Messallana, and would stand to succeed his father upon his death. She soon began to manipulate her husband into securing Nero's absence to power by having him adopt Nero as his own son. In 51 AD, she schemed to have the Praetorian prefect Rufius Crispinus replaced by Sextus Sophronius Barus, who was loyal to her. Toward the end of 54 AD, Claudius had begun to witness Agrippina's growing influence over his rule, and with Britannicus approaching manhood, he planned to remove Nero from his succession and reappoint his own son as his successor. Agrippina moved quickly and sought out Locusta in prison to acquire her services. She advised the empress to use a tropa belladonna, more commonly known as deadly nightshade, which had been used by some early humans to make poison-tipped arrows. It was believed by some that the Roman Emperor Augustus had been poisoned by his wife Livia, who had used a tropa belladonna to poison his fresh figs. On the evening of October 13, 54 AD, Claudius was served with a plate of mushrooms, which had been poisoned with the deadly nightshade extract. It is unknown who exactly provided the fatal dose, with most accounts recording either his food toaster Olortus or his personal physician Xenophon. Claudius died after prolonged suffering, and one account describes his slow death being hastened by his doctors placing a poisoned feather down his throat to induce vomiting, whilst other records show he was poisoned a second time to quicken his demise. A contemporary account by Seneca the Younger ascribed his death to natural causes. However, there were many rumors which seemed to implicate members of the imperial household. With Claudius's death, Nero was appointed as emperor of the Roman Empire, and Agrippina now became a priestess of the cult of the defied Claudius, and exerted even more control over her son than she had ever done over her husband. Despite providing her assistance in removing Claudius, Locusta remained in prison until the following year, when she was again consulted on poisons, this time by Nero himself. He sought to murder his stepbrother Britannicus to ensure his consolidating of power. Britannicus had also earned the enmity of Nero by criticizing the emperor's singing voice, as well as referring to him by his birth name of Lucius Domitius. In December 55 AD, he was invited to a dinner party held by Nero and attended by his sister Octavia, Agrippina, and several other nobles, where he was given a hot drink tested by a food taster. Britannicus requested it to be cooled, and the poison was added, which began to act quickly, causing him to lose both his voice and breath. Nero reassured those present that Britannicus was merely suffering from an epileptic fit, and he was attended by the court doctors. Nero then returned to Locusta's cell and admonished her for her failure, flogging her with his own hand and threatening her with execution. She then provided a faster-acting poison to be administered to the already dying Britannicus. Nero waited some time before he gave his brother more poison, and it wasn't until the 11th of February 55 AD that Britannicus finally died at age 13. Many believed his death, the day before his 14th year, was no mere coincidence, as his ascent into manhood would have given him a claim to his father's throne. Locusta was now rewarded with a full pardon and gifted money and estates. She began to teach her craft to others, and had soon established a school of poisoners at her country estate. Nero now increasingly began to openly disagree with his mother's way of governing the empire. Soon, mother and son were in conflict, and by 59 AD, he had plotted her downfall after failing to engineer her death in a drowning accident. One account claims he sent 3 assassins to murder her. He then removed any influence from his mother's rule, and by 62 AD, the Praetorian prefect Sextus Afranius Borus, who would help Nero maintain a stable government, was dead, according to some accounts from poisoning. Nero's reign was increasingly erratic, and with the burning of Rome in 64 AD, he had angered an already tax-burdened and outraged public, and by 68 AD, a usurper by the name of Galba had declared himself emperor. Fleeing Rome in disguise, Nero sought sanctuary at the house of one of his freed men, and there attempted suicide, but could not bring himself to complete the task. He ordered one of his slaves to kill him. His death brought the end of the Julia Claudia dynasty, and the short reign of Galba began in the year of the 4 emperors. One of Galba's first acts as emperors was to order the arrest of the poisoner Locusta of Gaul, along with the hero's other favorites, Helius, Patrobius, and Narcissus. She was led in chains through the city and publicly executed for her crimes.